So my name is Karen Dukelow. I work as a cattle specialist based out of Moore Park, and my colleague beside me, Mike Egan, works as a grassland researcher. So I'm going to cover where we're at now. Mike's going to cover the difficult bit, how we're going to get to where we want to be. So where are we, and can we grow more? And I suppose when we're standing here at this stand, I'm going to ask you, can you grow more on your cattle farm? Can you get more grass into animals' mouths and earn more money on your beef farm? So where are we at the moment? We're eating about 5 tonne of dry matter per hectare. Okay, so that's what's getting into animals' mouths. What does that actually mean? How do you know where you're at on your own farm if you're not measuring grass? So 5 tonne of dry matter per hectare is roughly 5 grazings, or a combination of 5 grazings and cuttings. So roughly that's where we're at. We're only getting in and out to paddocks 5 times in the year. Where do we want to be? We want to be at 10 tonne, okay? That's the Grass 10 campaign. That's the target that we think is achievable. What does that mean? It means 10 grazings in the year. So yes, the answer is that we can grow more grass and get it into animals' mouths. So we're using 5. Moving over to the map here, this is how much we're actually growing. So to confuse you with more numbers, there's a different set of numbers here again. We're growing 8, and just because you can't get every blade of grass into an animal's mouth, we're actually eating about 5 on beef farms nationally. And look, as you know, the average, there's great variation around that. What are we doing on pasture base? So pasture base is our system for measuring grass. So any farmer who's out measuring every week, he's punching it into this system, or she's punching it into this system. What are they growing? What can we see can be achieved by these farmers? So look, on average, we're in around 13 tonne. That's what's being grown. So into the animal's mouth, 10, okay? So looking at this map, and this is something that comes up at farm walks frequently. Karen, that's grand for you, talking about growing 13 tonne of grass below in the south. Lovely free draining soil, no problem getting it into animals' mouths. I'm farming in Mead, heavy soils, cold soils in the spring. The good news is the map shows it can be done anywhere. We're in and around 13 tonne, and what we're finding on pasture base is actually there's more variation on a farm than across farms. So the worst paddock and the best paddock on a farm, there's bigger variation there. So what can we do to bring the worst paddock up to the best paddock? And look, we've set it out in building blocks, trying to give you a visual. We're starting at the bottom, starting with the big blocks first. And what we're seeing on beef farms, grazing infrastructure tends to be quite limiting. We don't go in first day and lay a roadway down the middle of it. If we had, we'd have access to those drier paddocks when things are wetter. We'd have options to come back into the yard and make life easier when the weather gets really, really wet. So grazing infrastructure, you would have heard about it at the first village, so we're not doing that in detail. The next steps, Mike is going to go through them, how we can improve soil fertility, get it growing. Back to the basics, spreading lime, P's and K's, grazing management on top of that. And if we want to squeeze another little bit out of it, reseeding. So I'll hand it over to Mike to go through the detail.
Thanks, Karen. So we've all been through the grazing infrastructure village, so we're not going to talk about that in much detail here at all. So what we want to cover is kind of the remaining 3 steps, and what can we do on our own farm to increase the amount of grass that we're growing, but more importantly utilising. So the first point I'm going to go through is soil fertility. So soil fertility is one of the most fundamental aspects on grazing farms if we want to grow and utilise more grass. If we don't have the correct soil fertility, it's very, very difficult to actually grow more grass because there's a limiting nutrient in our farm. So if we look at nationally what's happening, so all of the samples that are tested on our farms nationally and brought into a lab, we get the results back from those, and all of the paddocks that are just tested, not to mind paddocks that are not tested, only 11% of all those samples that are tested are optimum for PK and lime. So that means, on average, every 1 in 10 paddocks on your farm is good, and the remaining ones is limiting in 1 or all 3 of those nutrients. So the first thing we must do is actually test your own farm, test your own paddocks, and see where you are on your own farm. And then make a plan based on that and try and improve it on your own farm. But if we don't actually test it first of all, it's very, very difficult to actually make a plan and target your fertiliser and your slurry on the paddocks that need it more. So the first thing is soil pH. So we want to target a soil pH of 6.3. Why 6.3? Because this is the optimum point when we get the maximum utilization of all the fertilizers that we spread, and we can get the most grass growth on our farm. But for example, if we look at a soil pH that's between 5.5 and 6, what do you think is going to happen with the fertilizer we apply? A lot of that actually isn't utilized and is locked up in the soil because we don't have the correct soil pH to allow that to be released and allow the plant to use it. So on average, 25% reduction in fertilizer utilization between 5.5 and 6 soil pH. So in another term, every €100 that you spend on fertilizer, if your soil pH isn't correct, €25 of that is wasted or locked up in the soil until you get your soil pH correct. So soil pH and lime status is the most fundamental aspect that we must address, and first step in terms of correcting it long term. In terms of index, going from an index 1 for your soil P and K to an index 3, which is our target, it can grow us an additional 1.5 tonne dry matter per hectare. So in terms of financial point, it's actually quite cheap to spread lime and get a 2-to-1 return on the amount of lime that we spread. So if we spread 2 tonne of lime per acre, which will solve a lot of our issues on our own farm, we can actually make that money back from increasing fertilizer utilization within 2 years. So it's actually a huge financial return on spreading that lime, and the same with the P and the K. So that's the first point we must do. The second point I'm going to talk about, and Karen mentioned them, is grazing management. So mid-season grazing management. Now you'll see this as you go through the hole in the hedge over here to the next village, to the grazing demo. But what we're going to talk about is what we want in front of our animals. At any one time, everyone wants the best quality feed. You want enough of it and of the best quality so you can get the best performance from that on your farm. And how do we do that? So you're not going to go into a feed merchant and ask for the worst possible concentrate possible out of the feed mill and then expect the highest animal performance from that. And our grass management is the exact same. So we always want the best quality grass in front of our animals. And what is that? So it's a very, very green, high proportion of leaf and very little stem and fibre in it. And if we can actually target those, we can increase our animal performance and also grass growth. So you heard it in the grazing infrastructure village, grow it in 3 weeks and graze it in 3 days. Why do we want to graze it in 3 days? They touched that up there because you increase grass production and you don't hit regrowths. But the most important thing in terms of growing it in 3 days, we want to achieve this target of between 8 and 10 centimetres pre-grazing sward height. And if we do this typically, I know we're in struggling situations in terms of moisture deficit at the moment, but on an average year, if we can grow this in 3 weeks, we can get this kind of target of 8 to 10 centimetres, which is very, very good quality, high leaf and low stem, and we can get maximum utilisation from that. If we go to a longer rotation length, greater than 25 days, we've a much higher pre-grazing herbage mass, or a much higher cover, but there's a lot more fibre and stem in it and seed heads. It's actually going to reduce the utilisation on the sward, but it'll also reduce animal performance because there's more stem and fibre in it. And likewise, if you go to very, very low cover, so you're going in very, very early and consecutively going in very, very early, what's going to happen with those? You're going to overgraze the paddock, you'll reduce pasture performance, and it can also limit animal intake as well. So if we can do this and achieve the correct pre-grazing covers, we can achieve greater than 1 kilo average live daily weight gain per day. Now you will see a range of these covers as you go through to the grazing demo. But the next point in terms of grazing management is autumn grazing management. And you may say, it's the end of June, what the name of God is he talking about autumn for? We're actually only 5 weeks away from the 1st of August. And when we look at our grazing season, the grassland season or the grassland management season starts in the back end, because what you do in the end of the year has huge implications for what actually is going to happen on our farm the following spring. So how do we manage our farm from the 1st of August onwards? So the first thing that's going to happen is generally in August and September, our grass growth rate declines. If our grass growth rate declines, we're not going to get the same amount of grass growing in the 21 days, so we must increase our rotation length. And typically, every week from the 1st of August onwards, it's 2.5 days per week or 10 days per month. We want to extend the rotation. How do we do that? We sell some weanlings if we're going to sell them weanlings, if they're fit to sell. If there's animals fit to slaughter, we sell some of the slaughters. Or if there's cull cows that you're planning on culling anyway, can you cull them a little earlier to keep the more grass on your farm for the more valuable animals that you plan on keeping long term in the system to actually slaughter the next year or keep for the grazing season the following year. So that's how we do that. And by doing this and increasing our rotation length, we're actually going to build up a blanket of grass on our farm by the 3rd or 4th week of September. And that blanket of grass that we have on our farm is actually going to dictate how long we can graze for the remainder of the year. So if we have a very, very low level of grass on our farm at that stage, we're not going to grow a whole lot more from September onwards. Our housing date is going to be much earlier, or the volume of grass that we can feed our cows, our animals, is much lower. So by building up that blanket of grass, we actually have more grass available to feed our cows and our heifers, or whatever it may be, and you can actually target a longer grazing season. The second point then is, once we get to kind of the first 4th to the 10th of October, depending on soil conditions, wetter soils are earlier and heavier, and drier soils are later. Once we graze a paddock, it's no longer grazed until the following spring. So every paddock we graze from the 4th or the 10th of October to the last paddock we grazed, and whenever you house your animals in the 1st or 2nd week of November, is no longer grazed until the following spring. And what you're left with is a wedge shape of grass, so from the paddock that was grazed first with the highest amount of grass to the paddock that was grazed last with the lowest amount of grass. And you have that blanket of grass built up on your farm for the following spring. So you can target earlier turnout, February or March, whenever your soil conditions allow, and you can actually have that grass available for your animals rather than having to feed concentrate and silage at that time. You can actually feed a much cheaper feed by having that blanket of grass built up. So that's kind of autumn grazing management, and it is only 5 weeks away, but what happens in the next 5 weeks is actually going to dictate the rest of the year, which actually dictates what's going to happen on your farm the next spring and how much grass you have on your farm. In terms of the last point then is reseeding and white clover. So this is the last point on the permit that Karen mentioned here. So reseeding is very, very important. However, there are certain things we must implement first and actually target so we can actually get the most from our reseed. Reseeding is very expensive. So number one, we only want to target our poor performing paddocks to actually reseed them. But because it's quite expensive, we want to get the most value from that reseed. By ensuring you have the correct soil fertility, grazing management, we can ensure that reseed is going to persist long term in the sward and you get the most from it. But if you haven't got the infrastructure in place to actually utilise that extra grass that's going to be grown, is it worth reseeding it either? This is a question you must ask yourself. So number one, these poor performing paddocks are costing us a lot of money, but we must only reseed when we're in a position to actually utilise that extra grass and ensure that reseed is going to last and persist long term in this sward. In terms of white clover, so white clover should be a fundamental part of our grazing systems. Why is that? It can increase pasture production, so it can increase the amount of grass that we're growing. You can potentially reduce the amount of chemical fertilizer you're applying because it's a legume. It takes nitrogen from the atmosphere and makes available in the ground. And thirdly, because it's a better quality feed, there's lower fibre and higher protein in it, you can actually increase the animal performance on that sward. However, if you don't, same as the reseed, if you don't have the soil fertility, the grazing management, or the infrastructure to ensure that clover persists in the sward, again, you must have these building blocks in place before you can get the most value from that reseed. So just as a conclusion, Karen asked us, can we grow more grass? Of course we can grow more grass if we change little things on our farm, and if you can go an additional 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 ton or whatever it is on your farm, that's more grass that you're now grazing. If you can grow more grass, it's a potential to drop some leased ground that you have on outside blocks that you don't need if you can get more from the own ground that you have on your own platform at home. So how do we do this? We need continued improvement of development and improvement of our grazing infrastructure and also our soil fertility. So we must test it, make a plan, and actually implement that plan long term to ensure that we can actually target that issue. Grazing management, we're always thinking ahead, so what we do today has implementations or problems for the next 3 weeks if we don't do it right now, but also in the autumn has huge implications for the following spring and how much grass we have. And finally then reseeding. It's a very, very important aspect, but again it's the last step in the ladder, ensuring that we can get the most from that reseed and making sure that it can persist long term in this world. So there's a few people pushing down. We may have time for 1 or 2 questions for myself and Karen. If you don't ask them here, I'll be over on the side here afterwards when Karen is starting the second group.